The Holocaust did not only happen in Germany. The Nazis occupied, invaded and annexed large parts of Eastern and Western Europe, spreading terror and death. In this video we will take a look on German rule in occupied Europe. Nazi expansion. By the summer of 1940, the Nazis controlled much of Western Europe, including Eastern France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Denmark, the Baltic states, Norway, Austria, Czechoslovakia and the western half of Poland. This occupation continued until the D-Day landings and Soviet invasion of 1944. At the height of German expansion, there were an estimated 175 million people under their control. While there were resistance movements across the continent, many individual people and governments throughout Europe decided to collaborate with the Nazis instead of fighting against them. There were various reasons for this. Some agreed with Nazi ideology. Some wanted to avoid war and did not realize the extent of the terror that was to be unleashed. Some were simply not able to fight back against a military invasion and chose to collaborate to avoid being completely defeated and crushed. Establishing and maintaining control of occupied territories was, of course, critical. This was achieved in a number of ways that varied from one place to the next. The Nazis often left local governments in place, provided they were either sympathetic to Berlin or could be easily manipulated. Each occupied nation was appointed a Gauleiter, a senior Nazi party official who ruled in the manner of a governor. Resisting Nazi rule. The level of control and force wielded in each occupied country was often based on Hitler's personal perception of it. Nations with large populations of Aryans, like Norway and Austria, were treated comparatively better than those with sizable Jewish and Slavic populations. Anyone in an occupied territory who resisted or criticized the Nazis was likely to be detained in concentration camps or forced labor. Conversely, those who supported or collaborated with the Nazis were often permitted to maintain their lifestyle. In December 1941, Hitler signed the notorious Night and Fog Decree, authorizing summary executions for anyone caught campaigning against or resisting Nazi rule. This was usually done in secret, and those executed were said to have disappeared into the night and fog of Germany. Economic control. Probably the main function of the Nazi occupation was to supply the German war effort with raw materials, resources and cheap labor. Berlin sent economics experts into each occupied territory to decide how its domestic economy could be put to work for Germany. Owners of mining companies, factories and manufacturers were forced to sign contracts to supply the Nazi war machine with resources or goods, usually at very low rates. Wages were fixed at low levels, around 20% less than before the war, and prices were sometimes controlled. Forced labor. The Nazis also imposed restrictions on labor. As in Germany itself, there was very little free movement of labor. Each person was given a workbook and an identity card, then allocated a job. As the war progressed, the authorities in some Nazi-occupied countries introduced labor conscription. Locals could even be forced to relocate to Germany for work. Non-workers had to carry identity papers, and there were restrictions on movement, such as checkpoints and curfews. Media under Nazi rule. Most local newspapers continued to operate but were placed under the control of local Nazis or sympathizers. There was a ban on publishing bad news, information about German defeats or articles about the resettlement or deportation of Jews. Locals were even forced to salute SS officers or high-ranking Nazi party members. Brutality in Poland. The most brutal Nazi occupation was in Poland. In September 1939, the Polish state was effectively dissolved and divided in two, the invading Germans occupying the western half and the Soviet Red Army occupying the east. Hitler's policy in Poland was not one of occupation but of Germanization. He appointed Hans Frank, the party's fanatical lawyer, as Gauleiter of the general government or general government, the Nazi term for occupied Poland. One of Frank's first priorities was Operation Intelligence Action, or the liquidation of Poland's intelligentsia. For 6 months, squads of Einsatzgruppen marched Polish aristocrats, academics, teachers, judges, lawyers, priests, politicians and writers into remote forests and shot them in cold blood. Though intelligence action was not specifically anti-Jewish, many of the 60,000 people killed were Jews. The Catholic Church in Poland was also targeted. 4/5 of Catholic priests and nuns were either killed or deported to concentration camps. Polish Jews. But for the Hitler regime, the most significant target in Poland was its 2 million Jews, the largest Jewish population in Western Europe. By early 1941, most Polish Jews had been forced out of their homes and herded into ghettos. As the SS stepped up its campaign against Polish Jews, other Poles were warned not to hide or assist Jews in any way. In November 1941, Hans Frank posted a decree warning that any Pole who concealed or aided Jews would be summarily shot. In some cases, entire Polish families were executed for harboring Jews. For a while, Polish Jews became a source of slave labor. Tens of thousands were employed by local factories at very cheap rates, their wages paid to Nazi officials rather than the workers themselves.